My daughter asked me to come to her big awards night, but when I got there, she handed me a most embarrassing dad trophy in front of everyone. I left before she could see the look in my eyes. By the next morning, she was calling me nonstop. She couldn't believe what I did to her. I will tell you everything. First, let me quickly thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout out in our next story. Today's special shout out goes to Sam Johnson from Miami. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's go deeper into the story. I had spent the better part of 3 decades laying bricks, pouring concrete, and fixing roofs under the hot summer sun of Kansas City. I took pride in the precision of my work, in the way a level beam and a clean finish spoke more of a man's character than any grand speech. My hands were calloused, my shoulders broad, and though my hair had thinned and gone gray, I carried myself with a quiet dignity that didn't need much explanation. I had a small house on the edge of town, a beat-up Ford pickup in the driveway, and a daughter I'd raised alone since her mother died when Emily was only 9. Everything I did for her. That's why, when Emily called and told me she was being recognized at her college awards night, I felt a swell of pride I hadn't tasted in years. I put on my best collared shirt, iron slacks I hadn't worn since her high school graduation, and dabbed on some aftershave I'd bought for the occasion. I even stopped by the florist to pick up a single yellow rose, Emily's favorite. When I walked into that crowded college auditorium, I thought nothing could ruin the night. I didn't mind the curious glances from the younger parents or the whispered laughter I caught now and then. None of that mattered. I was there for Emily. When they called Emily's name, I rose to my feet, clapping so hard my hands stung. She looked beautiful under the stage lights, her dark hair pulled back, that bright red dress I'd bought for her last Christmas shimmering like a promise. She walked up to the podium with a confident smile, and for a moment, I felt the ache in my chest, the quiet pride of a father who had done his job. But then she turned, and that smile turned into a smirk. "Before I accept this award," she said into the microphone, "I'd like to take a moment to thank my dad, Jim Harrington, the most embarrassing dad in the world." The audience laughed. My heart froze. A young man I hadn't seen before stepped up from the wings, carrying a small trophy. Cheap plastic with the gold paint already flaking at the edges. He handed it to Emily with an exaggerated bow, and she took it with a flourish, holding it up for everyone to see. The words "most embarrassing dad" were spelled out in gaudy black letters. The laughter grew louder. Emily winked at them, soaking it in. "Thanks, Dad," she said, looking straight at me, "for making every day an adventure in secondhand embarrassment." I felt the color drain from my face. My hands dropped to my sides. I saw a few people in the front row glance back at me and snicker. I had always believed I could weather any storm for Emily, but in that moment, it was as if she had reached into my chest and pulled out my heart. She didn't see my shock, didn't notice the way I shifted my weight from one foot to the other, searching for something solid to stand on. I didn't wait for the speeches to end. I turned and walked out, the single yellow rose still clutched in my rough hands. Outside, the night air was cool, almost gentle, a mercy I didn't deserve. I stood on the edge of the parking lot, listening to the distant laughter that still spilled from the auditorium. I felt the weight of that plastic trophy without even having to see it again. I let the rose fall to the asphalt and watched the petals scatter under the glow of the streetlight. Then I climbed into my old truck and drove home in silence. In the hush of that drive, I felt something in me shift. A line I hadn't known was there, drawn in the quiet dignity of a man who had given everything and realized, finally, that it wasn't enough to be someone's punchline. The line had been crossed, and I knew that even if Emily didn't see it yet, I would not let her step over it again. The house was dark when I got home, the quiet wrapping around me like a thick blanket. I didn't bother turning on the lights. I went straight to the kitchen and set the keys down on the worn oak counter. My hands shook as I reached for the sink, bracing myself against the edge, feeling the cold metal bite into my palms. I closed my eyes and let the memory of that moment in the auditorium wash over me again and again, like waves that refused to let me breathe. I had spent my whole life trying to be the father Emily needed, patching up skin knees, packing school lunches, sitting through dance recitals, and late-night study sessions. I had stood in the cold, watching her soccer games even when she barely glanced my way. I thought that if I showed up every time, no matter what, she would understand how much I loved her. But I was wrong. Somewhere along the line, my quiet devotion had become invisible to her, or maybe just something to mock. I remembered the way she used to look at me when she was little, eyes wide with trust, and that soft, sweet smile that could undo me in an instant. I wondered if she ever thought of those days anymore. I wondered if she knew how it felt to stand in front of a room full of strangers and be laughed at by the one person who should have been my refuge. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat at the small kitchen table. The old clock on the wall ticked steadily, filling the silence with its slow, patient rhythm. My phone buzzed once. Emily's name lit up on the screen. I let it ring. She tried again and again, but I didn't answer. I needed time to let the sting settle, to figure out where I went wrong and what I was willing to tolerate anymore. By the time the sun started to rise, I still hadn't slept. I watched the light creep across the floorboards, painting long, golden stripes that made the room seem almost hopeful. But hope felt like a luxury I didn't have the heart for just yet. I sat there with my coffee gone cold, the taste of it bitter on my tongue, and thought about all the times I had bent over backward for Emily. The jobs I took so she wouldn't have to go without. The hours I worked late, the weekends I gave up. I thought about how I let her call me old-fashioned and out of touch, how I laughed along when she teased me about my beat-up truck or my simple clothes. I didn't mind any of that. I didn't mind being a little outdated or a little rough around the edges. But what I couldn't stomach was being laughed at for loving her, for showing up for her, for never once hesitating to be her father, no matter what it cost me. I heard the knock on the door just before 8. I knew it was her. No one else would come by this early. I didn't get up right away. I waited, listening to her knock again, her voice small and shaky. "Dad? Please open the door. I need to talk to you." I finally opened it, and there she was, her hair a mess, her eyes red and swollen. She held out a crumpled letter, her hands trembling. "I'm getting evicted," she said, her voice breaking. "They're giving me 2 days to move out. I don't know what to do. I need your help, Dad. Please." I looked at her, my own daughter, so desperate and afraid. My first instinct was to gather her up in my arms and promise I'd fix it, like I always had. But something in me held back. A quiet voice that said it was time to let her stand on her own, even if it hurt. I took the letter from her and read it carefully. 2 days. Back rent unpaid for months. A polite, final warning from a landlord who'd clearly run out of patience. I handed the letter back to her and met her eyes. "I'll think about it," I said, my voice low and calm. "But Emily, you need to understand, what you did last night, it hurt me." She blinked at me, her mouth opening as if to argue. But I didn't give her the chance. I stepped back and closed the door, the latch clicking into place with a finality that surprised even me. I stood there in the hallway, my heart heavy but my mind strangely clear. I knew she was still there, just beyond the door, waiting for me to come out and make it all better. But I didn't. I couldn't. Not this time. The hours passed slowly that day. I put on my work boots and headed out to the small job I'd lined up, patching up a sagging porch for a retired couple a few blocks over. I liked the work. It was honest, repetitive in a way that let my mind settle. My hands knew what to do without me having to think, laying the new boards, checking the level, hammering each nail with quiet precision. But the whole time, my thoughts drifted back to Emily. I kept seeing her face from that night, proud and smug under the stage lights, holding that stupid plastic trophy. I had never been an angry man. I didn't believe in yelling or throwing things around when life disappointed me. No, my way had always been to get quiet, to pull back and find my balance again. And that's exactly what I did as I worked through the day, each nail driven into the wood a small act of reclaiming my dignity. By the time I got home, the sun was already starting to slip below the rooftops. My phone buzzed in my pocket over and over, Emily's number flashing on the screen. I didn't pick up. Not yet. I needed to be sure of what I was going to say before I let her back into my head. When I finally stepped into the house, she was sitting on the porch, knees drawn up to her chest, clutching that eviction letter like it was the only thing holding her together. She looked up at me with tear-streaked cheeks, her voice small and shaky. "Dad, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have done that to you last night. I didn't think it would hurt you so much. It was just a joke, okay? I stood there, looking at her. Really looking at her for the first time in what felt like years. I saw the fear in her eyes, the desperation. And I also saw the part of her that still didn't understand, the part that thought a quick apology would fix it all. I leaned against the porch railing, the old wood warm under my palms. It wasn't a joke to me, Emily, I said softly. It was a line, and you crossed it. She shook her head, tears welling up again. Dad, please. I don't know what to do. I'll lose everything. I don't have anyone else. You've always helped me. Please don't stop now. I let out a long breath, feeling the weight of every time I had come to her rescue, every time I dug into my own pockets to keep her afloat. I had always believed it was my job to protect her, to be the shield between her and the world. But standing there, I realized that shield had become a crutch. She'd leaned on me so long she didn't know how to stand without it. I'm not saying I don't care, I said finally, my voice steady. But I can't keep fixing this for you, Emily. You've got to find a way to take responsibility for what you've done. She looked at me like I'd just struck her, her mouth opening in shock. You're just going to let me get kicked out? You're my dad. I know, I said. And that's why I'm telling you the truth. You need to learn how to stand on your own feet, Emily. You need to know that actions have consequences. She started to cry in earnest then, her shoulders shaking with the force of it. I wanted to reach for her, to gather her up and hold her close. But I didn't. Not this time. I let her cry, the weight of her own choices pressing down on her like it had never done before. When she finally looked up, her eyes were red and swollen. So what am I supposed to do, Dad? Where am I supposed to go? I swallowed hard. You're smart. You'll figure it out. Maybe you'll ask a friend for help, or maybe you'll find a cheaper place to stay. I don't know. But I do know you can't keep counting on me to bail you out. She stared at me for a long moment, her lips trembling. Then she stood, crumpling the eviction letter in her hand. She didn't say another word as she turned and walked down the steps, the sound of her footsteps fading into the dark. I watched her go, my heart breaking in ways I hadn't known were possible. But I didn't call after her. I didn't follow. Because sometimes the hardest thing a father can do is to stop being the answer to someone else's mistakes. The next day, I woke up to silence. The kind that settles in your bones when there's nothing left to say. I made myself breakfast, fried eggs and toast, the kind of meal I'd made 1,000 times before. But that morning, everything tasted like ash. I sat at the kitchen table, staring out the window at the backyard I'd kept up for Emily. Mowed grass, the flower beds her mother once loved. I thought about how the years had passed by so quickly, how the little girl who used to chase fireflies out there had grown into someone I didn't always recognize. I spent the morning at work, laying bricks for a neighbor's new garden wall. My mind wandered with each stroke of mortar, each careful placement of stone. The quiet rhythm of it kept me sane, but it didn't stop the ache in my chest. I thought of Emily, of how she had always been the bright center of my life, even when she didn't see it. I thought of the way she laughed on that stage, how she didn't seem to understand what it cost me to walk away. When I got home, she was waiting for me again. She looked tired, her eyes hollow. She stood up when she saw me, her voice trembling. Dad, I'm sorry. I really am. I shouldn't have done that to you. I don't know what I was thinking. I nodded, letting her words wash over me. But I kept my distance, leaning against the porch post. I hear you, I said. But it's not just about an apology, Emily. It's about what comes next. She blinked at me, tears gathering in her eyes. What do you mean? I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of what I was about to say. I mean, I can't keep picking up the pieces for you. I've done it for too long, and I'm tired. I love you more than anything, but I won't let you take that love for granted anymore. She opened her mouth to argue, but I raised a hand to stop her. Emily, you're an adult now. You've got to learn how to take care of yourself. That starts with facing the consequences of your own choices. I won't pay your back rent this time. I won't make this go away. The words hung heavy in the air between us. She stared at me, her face pale, her lips trembling. You're really not going to help me? She whispered. I'm not, I said. My voice was calm, but it felt like I was tearing something out of my chest. I've always been here for you, but this isn't about me not caring. It's about you finally learning that you have to stand on your own 2 feet. You can't keep leaning on me every time life gets hard. She turned away from me then, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. I thought you'd always be there, she said, her voice breaking. I thought you'd never turn me away. I swallowed hard, feeling the burn in my throat. I am here, Emily. I'll always be your father. But I'm not your safety net anymore. It's time you learned how to take care of yourself. She didn't say anything else. She just stood there, shoulders shaking, before turning and walking away. I watched her go, my heart heavy, but my mind clear. I knew she hated me in that moment. I knew she saw my refusal as betrayal. But I also knew it was the first step toward her finally understanding what real love looked like. Love that didn't coddle or protect her from her own mistakes, but gave her the chance to find her own strength. I stood on that porch long after she was gone, the sun dipping low and painting the sky in streaks of red and gold. I felt the ache of it deep in my bones, but I also felt a quiet resolve I hadn't known was there. I would not let her disrespect me like that again. I would not let her mock the years I'd given to her without a second thought. For the first time in my life, I felt the weight of my own worth, and I knew I wouldn't let anyone, Emily included, take it from me. The night after Emily left, the house felt colder than it ever had. I sat in my chair by the fireplace, the wood crackling and popping, but it couldn't warm the emptiness that settled in my chest. I thought about calling her back, about softening the words I'd spoken on the porch, but I didn't. I knew that if I did, I'd be slipping back into old habits, the ones that let her believe my love was something she could lean on without ever having to respect it. The next day, she came back one more time. I heard the knock on the door just after sunset. I opened it to find her standing there, arms crossed, her expression tight with something that looked like anger. "Dad," she said, her voice clipped and cold. "I can't believe you're really going to let this happen. I don't have anywhere to go." I looked at her, standing in the glow of the porch light, and I felt the ache in my chest all over again. "Emily," I said quietly, "I'm not letting anything happen. You've known this was coming for months. You knew the rent was due, and you chose not to pay it." She let out a bitter laugh. "You're unbelievable. You're my dad. You're supposed to help me." "I've helped you all your life," I said. My voice was calm, but I could feel the weight of every time I'd pulled her out of trouble pressing down on me. "I've given you everything I could. I've stood by you through things most people would have walked away from. But this time, it's different. You humiliated me, Emily. You laughed at me in front of everyone. And now you're asking me to step in and save you again like nothing happened." She flinched, just a little. "It was a joke. Why can't you just get over it?" I felt my jaw tighten, because it wasn't a joke to me. It was a slap in the face. I stood there, listening to you make me the butt of a room full of strangers' laughter. And you didn't even see how much it hurt. That's not something you just get over. She looked down at her feet, her shoulders slumping. For a moment, I saw the little girl she used to be, the one who used to slip her hand into mine at the fair, who used to look at me like I was the only safe place in the world. But that girl was long gone, and the woman standing in front of me had to face the truth I'd been too soft to give her all these years. "I can't do this, Dad," she said finally, her voice cracking. "I can't just lose everything." "You're not going to lose everything," I said. I kept my voice even, though my chest felt like it was splitting open. "You're going to lose this apartment, that's true, but you're going to find a way to move forward. You're stronger than you think. You've never had to be, but it's there." She wiped at her eyes, her shoulders trembling. "I hate you for this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded slowly. "I know. And maybe one day you'll see why I had to do it. Maybe you won't. But I won't apologize for setting a boundary, Emily. I can't keep giving you pieces of myself when you treat them like they're nothing." She turned away, and I watched her walk down the steps, her head bowed, her shoulders stiff with the weight of her own choices. I stood there in the doorway long after she disappeared into the night, my heart heavy but my mind clear. I knew she was angry. I knew she felt abandoned. But I also knew this was the first time I'd truly stood my ground. I closed the door and leaned my forehead against the cool wood, breathing in the quiet of the house. It hurt. God, it hurt to see her like that. But in that hurt, there was a strange kind of peace, too. A sense that for once, I wasn't letting myself be walked over just because I loved her. The fire crackled behind me as I turned away from the door. I sat back down in my chair, the warmth of the flames reaching out to me in the silence. I felt the weight of the years pressing down on my shoulders, but for the first time, I didn't feel crushed by them. I felt like I'd finally claimed something that was mine all along, my dignity, my worth. And I knew, deep down, that I wouldn't let anyone take that away from me again. 2 days later, I heard that Emily had packed up her apartment. She didn't call me to help her move. She didn't ask for money or for me to smooth things over with the landlord. Part of me had half expected her to come back one last time, to plead or to rage, but she didn't. She was gone by the time the sun rose on that second day, her name stripped from the mailbox like it had never been there at all. I drove by the building that morning, the old red brick facade that had once seemed like a castle to her. The window where I used to see her reading late into the night was empty. I sat in my truck for a while, hands resting on the wheel, watching the movers carry boxes down the steps. I didn't go over. I didn't offer to help. It felt like the end of something, and I knew I had to let it end. When I got home, I walked around the house for a long time, touching the things that had once been hers, a faded photo of us at the county fair, a lopsided clay mug she'd made for me in 4th grade. I let the memories wash over me, each one a small, quiet ache. She was still my daughter. She always would be. But the version of her I'd spent years protecting, the little girl who'd once clung to my hand, was gone. And I had to let her go. I spent that afternoon tending the garden. It had been weeks since I'd really worked it. Emily's troubles had stolen so much of my time and energy. I pulled the weeds, turned the soil, and planted new seeds in the rich earth. My hands worked in the dirt, and with every scoop and pat, I felt something settle in me. Life went on. Things ended, and new things began. That was the way of it. That evening, I sat on the porch with a glass of iced tea, watching the fireflies blink in the dusk. The air was warm and still, the world soft and hushed in the fading light. I thought about Emily, wherever she was, and I hoped she'd find her footing. I hoped she'd come to understand that what I'd done wasn't out of anger or cruelty, but because I wanted her to grow, to stand on her own 2 feet. To learn that love wasn't about blind devotion, it was about respect. I didn't know if she'd ever forgive me. I didn't know if she'd ever come back. But for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. Like the house was finally mine again, filled with the quiet dignity I'd always tried to build into the walls and floors. I had spent so long trying to hold her world together that I'd forgotten my own was worth protecting too. As the stars began to come out, I thought about all the things I'd learned in the last few days. That love isn't something you can force or buy. That sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is to step back and let someone face the consequences of their own choices. That my worth wasn't measured by how much I could fix, but by the strength to know when to stop. I took a long, slow breath and let the night air fill my lungs. Emily was out there somewhere, finding her way. And me? I was here, in this small, quiet house I built with my own 2 hands. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. I would no longer be the punchline to someone else's joke. I had drawn my line, and I would stand by it. And in that stillness, in that final letting go, I found a peace I'd never known before. If you found this story of quiet resolve and the power of letting go as moving as I did, please consider subscribing to the channel for more heartfelt narratives like this. Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear if you've ever had to draw your own line and how it shaped you. See you soon in the next story.